The orbital station hung in the void like a metal flower, its petals made of docking arms and observation decks. Inside the grand hall, representatives from 47 species watched as Velrakis stepped into the combat circle. He stood 9 feet tall, his body covered in natural armor that looked like black glass. 4 arms extended from his torso, each one holding an energy blade that hummed with lethal power. Across from him, the human delegation sat in uncomfortable silence. They had been in galactic space for only 3 years, and already they faced their first formal challenge. Ambassador Tehi gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles white with tension. "The humans speak of honor," Velrakis announced, his voice carrying across the hall through translation devices. "But they know nothing of true combat. They are weak. Their weapons are primitive. Their bodies break easily." He pointed one blade at the human section. "I challenge your strongest warrior. Let us see if humanity deserves to sit among the great species of this galaxy." According to the ancient laws that governed the galactic community, refusing a formal challenge meant accepting permanent dishonor. The entire human species would be marked as cowards, banned from military alliances and trade agreements. Tehi knew they had no choice. Day-One stood up from his seat. He was not particularly tall or muscular by human standards, but he moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had survived many battles. He wore a simple black uniform with no decorations. At his side hung a sword in a plain wooden scabbard. "I accept your challenge," Day-One said simply. Velrakis laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "You bring a metal stick to face me? I almost pity you, human." Day-One stepped into the combat circle and drew his weapon. It was a katana, forged from carbon steel using techniques that were 1,000 years old on Earth. No energy field surrounded it. No power cell hummed within it, just folded metal with an edge sharp enough to split falling silk. "My sword ends you," Velrakis promised, lowering into a fighting stance that had been perfected over 10,000 years of Velthari military tradition. The Arbiter raised his hand to signal the start of combat. Representatives from dozens of species leaned forward in their seats. Most had never seen a human fight before. The betting pools predicted Day-One would last less than 30 seconds. The Arbiter's hand dropped. Velrakis moved first, incredibly fast for something so large. 2 of his blades swept high while the other 2 came in low, a classic Velthari attack pattern designed to give the opponent no safe direction to dodge. The energy blades left purple trails in the air. Day-One shifted his weight, preparing to meet the attack. His sword began to rise, and then Gia stepped between them. She simply walked into the combat circle from the side, moving at a normal pace as if she was crossing a street back on Earth. She wore the dark blue uniform of diplomatic security, and her hands were empty of weapons. The entire hall fell silent. Velrakis pulled his strikes at the last possible moment, confusion breaking his perfect form. "What is this? Who dares interrupt a formal challenge?" Gia looked at Velrakis, then at Day-One, then back at the towering alien warrior. And then she laughed. It was not a nervous laugh or a scared laugh. It was genuine amusement, the kind of laughter that comes from seeing something absurd. The sound echoed in the silent hall. "This is ridiculous," Gia said, still chuckling. "You're about to kill someone over a disagreement about honor codes that neither species fully understands. And we're all just going to sit here and watch it happen because some ancient law says we have to? Remove yourself, female," Velrakis growled. "You violate sacred tradition. The penalty for interfering with a formal challenge is death." "See, that's the problem," Gia said, her smile fading into something more serious. "You aliens, you have all these rules. The challenge must be accepted. The combat must be one-on-one. The observers cannot interfere. The weapons must be declared. Everything has a protocol, a tradition, a proper way of doing things." She spread her hands. "But humans, we don't fight like that." "Then you are savages without honor," Velrakis said. "Maybe," Gia agreed. "Or maybe we just understand something you don't. Fighting isn't about following rules. It's about surviving and winning. And if you want to see how humans really fight, let me show you." Before anyone could react, Gia moved. She ducked under Velrakis's guard and struck him in what would be a solar plexus on a human. For Velthari, it was a nerve cluster that controlled their lower arms. 2 of Velrakis's energy blades clattered to the floor as his muscles spasmed. Then she turned to Day-One. "Sorry about this," she said, and kicked his knee from the side. Not hard enough to injure, but enough to make him buckle. As he dropped, she plucked the katana from his grip with practiced ease. She now stood in the center of the circle holding a human sword, facing a 9-foot alien warrior who still had 2 energy blades. The representatives erupted in chaos. Some demanded Gia's immediate execution. Others argued about whether the challenge was still valid. A few simply stared in shock. "This is impossible," Velrakis hissed. "You cannot defeat me. I am trained from birth in combat. My body is armor. My blades can cut through steel." "Probably," Gia agreed. "But here's the thing. You're used to fighting opponents who follow your rules, who attack from the front, who use proper stances and traditional techniques." She began to circle him slowly. "I'm not going to do any of that." Velrakis lunged at her with his remaining 2 blades. Gia dropped the sword and ran directly at him, closing the distance so fast that his blades passed over her head. She was suddenly inside his guard, too close for his long arms to strike effectively. She grabbed one of his disabled lower arms and twisted, using his own armored weight against him. The giant warrior stumbled. "Humans don't just fight with weapons," Gia said, dancing backward before he could recover. "We fight with everything: psychology, surprise, tactics that make no sense until they work." She picked up one of the fallen energy blades. The weapon was designed for Velthari hands, awkward for her human grip, but she held it anyway. "And here's what really bothers me about this whole situation. I had your armor analyzed before this duel. Want to know what I found?" Velrakis froze. "Traces of Zenth poison on your blade edges," Gia continued. "Not enough to kill instantly. Just enough to paralyze after a few minutes. You were going to win this honorable duel by cheating." She tossed the energy blade back to the floor. So much for sacred tradition. The hall erupted again, but this time the anger was directed at Velrakis. The Arbiter called for silence and for medical scanners to verify Gia's claim. 3 different species confirmed the presence of poison. "The human female speaks truth," the Arbiter announced. "The challenge was false from the beginning." Velrakis said nothing. He simply stood there, his honor shattered more completely than any blade could have managed. Gia helped Daewon to his feet. "Sorry for kicking you," she said quietly. "You saved my life," Daewon replied, "and probably prevented a war." "Yeah, well," Gia said, watching as security forces moved to escort Velrakis away. "I'm probably going to be executed for breaking about 15 different galactic laws, but at least everyone now knows that humans don't play by the old rules." Ambassador Tehi approached them, her expression unreadable. "What you did was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever witnessed." "Could be both," Gia said with a shrug. The ambassador almost smiled. "The council has summoned us. They want to discuss what happens next." She looked at Gia with something like respect. Whatever that is, humanity just announced itself to the galaxy in a way no one will ever forget. Gia glanced back at the combat circle, at the abandoned weapons and the shocked faces of 47 species. She had closed the distance and laughed in the face of 10,000 years of tradition, and somehow everyone was still alive. That seemed like a good start. The council chamber was older than most civilizations. Its walls were made from compressed starlight, or so the legends claimed. Representatives from the 12 founding species sat in a semicircle, looking down at the 3 humans who stood in the center of the floor. Gia, Daewon, and Ambassador Tehi waited in silence while the council deliberated. Finally, Arbiter Thexelon spoke. He was ancient even by the standards of his long-lived species. His body more energy than matter at this point. "Gia of Earth, you have violated the sacred law of non-interference. You stepped into a formal challenge. You disrupted a ritual that has governed conflicts for 50,000 years. The penalty for this crime is execution. Do you have anything to say before we pass judgment?" Gia stepped forward. "I do. That duel was a trap. Velrakis poisoned his blades. He was going to murder Daewon and call it honor. If I hadn't stopped it, you would have let it happen. So yes, I broke your law. But your law was about to get someone killed for no good reason except tradition. The poison was discovered only because of your interference." Another council member said. This one looked like a floating crystal formation. The challenge would have been declared void once the deception was revealed. "After Daewon was paralyzed or dead," Gia shot back. "You would have apologized to his corpse. I'm sure that would have been very honorable." Ambassador Tehi touched Gia's arm gently. "Perhaps I should speak," she said quietly, then addressed the council. "Honored representatives, my security officer acted to save a life and expose a conspiracy." Her methods were unconventional, but her intentions were pure. Surely that counts for something. Intentions do not matter, Thexlon said. Only actions matter. The law is clear. Daewon had been silent until now. He stepped forward to stand beside Jia. Then execute me as well, he said. I was ready to die following your rules. She saved me by breaking them. If breaking rules to save lives is a crime, then I want to share that crime. The council members spoke among themselves in their various languages, the translation devices struggling to keep up. Finally, Thexlon raised a hand for silence. We have reviewed the evidence thoroughly, he said. The investigation reveals something more disturbing than one warrior's deception. The Velthari Empire planned to use Daewon's death as justification for declaring war on humanity. They claimed humans insulted their honor by requesting changes to trade agreements. The duel was meant to be the first casualty of that war. A holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber, showing intercepted communications between Velthari military commanders. The evidence was clear. They had been planning an invasion. Jia's interference destroyed their justification, Thexlon continued. By exposing the poison and disrupting the challenge, she prevented a war that would have cost millions of lives across dozens of systems. He paused. However, she still violated galactic law. We cannot simply ignore this, or every species will believe they can break our traditions whenever convenient. So what happens now? Tai-He asked, her voice steady despite the tension. We offer a compromise, Thexlon said. Jia claims that humanity fights differently, that your species does not follow the traditional paths of honor in combat. Very well, prove it. Demonstrate that your methods have value beyond simple chaos. Another council member leaned forward. There is a border conflict in the Karis sector. The Skarnathi horde has been raiding colonies. Traditional military responses have failed. They are too numerous and too adaptable to standard tactics. If human methods are truly superior, let them be tested there. Thexlon nodded. Jia, you will be given 6 months to train a battalion of mixed-species warriors using human combat philosophy. You will then deploy this battalion against the Skarnathi. If you succeed, humanity will be granted full military status in the galactic community, and the charges against you will be dropped. If you fail, humanity will be expelled from galactic protection and you will face execution for your crimes. Jia swallowed hard. You want me to train alien soldiers to fight like humans? That is the offer, Thexlon said. You have 1 hour to decide. The 3 humans were escorted to a private chamber to discuss their options. As soon as the door closed, Tai-He turned to Jia. You don't have to do this. I can negotiate something else. Maybe exile instead of execution. Maybe restricted diplomatic status instead of full expulsion. No, Jia said firmly. This is actually a good deal. If we succeed, humanity gets everything we've been asking for. Military alliances, defense treaties, access to advanced training facilities. We become equals instead of the new kids everyone looks down on. And if you fail, you die, Tai-He pointed out. And humanity gets kicked out of galactic space. Then I won't fail, Jia said simply. Daewon had been studying the information packet the council provided. It says here you can choose 1 co-trainer and select your battalion from volunteers across all species. Who are you going to pick? Jia looked at him. I'm picking you. You were special forces on Earth. You understand both traditional combat and how to adapt to weird situations. Plus, you know how to teach. I saw your record. You trained 3 different units before joining the diplomatic mission. I accept, Daewon said without hesitation. Though I should warn you, I've never trained aliens before. I'm not even sure how to start. We'll figure it out, Jia said. That's what humans do, right? We figure things out as we go. They returned to the council chamber and announced their decision. Thexlon seemed almost pleased. Very well. You will be transported to Training Ground Sigma 7, a facility on an uninhabited moon. Resources will be provided. The battalion will consist of 150 volunteers from various species. None of them will be from elite military units. You will be training the outcasts, the rejects, the ones who failed traditional training programs. Jia blinked. You're giving me the worst soldiers in the galaxy and expecting me to turn them into an elite fighting force in 6 months? If human methods are truly superior, skill level should not matter, Thexlon said. You will teach them to think differently, to fight differently. That is what you promised. As they left the council chamber, Jia felt the weight of what she had agreed to settle on her shoulders. She had saved 1 life and prevented 1 war. But now she had to prove that humanity's chaotic approach to combat was not just luck or desperation. That night, aboard the human ship Defiant Dawn, Captain Hyunwoo held a small gathering in Jia's honor. The ship's crew had heard about what happened at the challenge, and they treated her like a hero. But Jia could not enjoy the celebration. She kept thinking about the 150 soldiers she would soon meet. All of them trained in rigid traditional systems. All of them rejected by their own militaries. Daewon found her on the observation deck staring out at the stars. Having second thoughts, he asked. Always, Jia admitted. But that doesn't change anything. We have to do this. What's your plan? How do you teach an alien to fight like a human when they don't even think like a human? Jia was quiet for a moment. I think that's exactly the point. We don't teach them to be human. We teach them to stop being so rigid, to question their training, to improvise, to use their own unique abilities in ways their instructors never imagined. She turned to face him. Every species has strengths. The problem is they only use those strengths in approved traditional ways. We're going to show them there are no approved ways. There's only what works. That's going to be harder than it sounds, Daewon said. Everything worthwhile is, Jia replied. 3 days later, they arrived at Training Ground Sigma 7. The moon was barren and cold, with only the training facility to break up the gray landscape. As their shuttle touched down, Jia could see figures waiting near the landing pad. 150 soldiers from a dozen different species, all of them watching the human ship with distrust or curiosity or both. Jia took a deep breath and stood up. Ready? She asked Daewon. No, he said honestly. But let's go anyway. They walked down the shuttle ramp into the thin atmosphere. The soldiers stood in neat formation organized by species. Nobody spoke. The wind howled across the empty moon, carrying dust that stung against Jia's skin. She walked to the front of the formation and looked at the assembled warriors, insectoids with compound eyes, rock-like beings that barely moved, scaled reptilians, gaseous entities contained in environmental suits, and a handful of others that defied easy description. I know what you've been told, Jia said, her voice carried by the translation devices everyone wore. You've been told that you failed, that you're not good enough for traditional military service, that you're here because nobody else wants you. She paused. Good. That means you're ready to learn something new. A four-armed soldier in the front row spoke up. We have heard you broke sacred combat law, that you disgraced yourself. Why should we learn from someone without honor? Because honor didn't stop a war, Jia said. Breaking the rules did, and in the next 6 months I'm going to teach you that survival is more important than tradition, that winning is more important than looking good doing it, and that sometimes the best way to fight is to do something nobody expects. She smiled. Welcome to the human way of war. It's messy, it's chaotic, and it works. The first week was a disaster. Jia divided the battalion into squads of 10, mixing species together rather than keeping them separated. This alone caused problems. A massive rock being named Ganthor nearly crushed a smaller insectoid during a simple marching drill. 2 different species refused to share sleeping quarters because of ancient territorial conflicts. And when Jia tried to demonstrate a basic evasion technique, half the soldiers stood frozen, waiting for her to explain the proper form before they would even attempt it. On the 5th day, Daewon found Jia sitting outside the training facility, her head in her hands. It's not working, she said. They're too used to following orders exactly as given. They wait for permission to think. I asked them to come up with 3 ways to cross a ravine, and they just stared at me until I gave them the approved solution. They've been trained their entire lives to follow doctrine, Daewon said, sitting down beside her. You can't undo that in a few days. We don't have time for slow progress, Jia said. In 6 months, these soldiers are going into real combat against an enemy that has defeated every traditional military force sent against them. If we can't teach them to adapt, they're going to die, and humanity's chance at acceptance dies with them. That night, Jia called all 150 soldiers into the main training hall. She stood on a platform so everyone could see her, even the tall ones and the floating ones. We're changing the approach, she announced. Starting tomorrow, there are no more scheduled drills. No more formations. No more waiting for me to tell you what to do next. She gestured to the vast empty hall around them. This facility has obstacle courses, weapon ranges, simulation rooms, and training equipment from 24 different military traditions. For the next month, you're going to explore all of it. Try everything, fail at things, find out what you're bad at and what you're surprisingly good at, and most importantly, you're going to start teaching each other. A gaseous being named Errol spoke up, its voice synthesized through its environmental suit. You want us to train ourselves? That makes no sense. We need instruction. You've had instruction your whole lives, Gia said. It didn't work or you wouldn't be here. So instead, I'm going to teach you something your instructors never did. I'm going to teach you to think for yourselves. The next morning, chaos erupted. Some soldiers immediately went to the weapons range and started testing every gun and blade they could find. Others wandered the obstacle courses randomly. A few just sat in corners, completely lost without orders to follow. But slowly, something interesting began to happen. A young human soldier named Bora was watching the insectoid warrior Krillax struggle with a climbing wall. Krillax had 4 arms and incredible strength, but he kept trying to climb using the official handholds marked on the wall. Bora walked over. "Why are you using the marked path?" she asked. "It is the proper way," Krillax said, his mandibles clicking with frustration. "But the holds are too far apart for my reach pattern." "So don't use them," Bora said. "You have 4 arms and claws that can grip stone. Just climb straight up." Krillax stared at her. "The holds are marked for a reason." "Yeah, they're marked for species with 2 arms and feet that can pivot," Bora explained. "But you're not that species. So forget the marks. Use your actual advantages." Krillax hesitated, then reached out and dug his claws directly into the wall material. He climbed straight up in about 10 seconds, moving faster than any 2-armed species could manage. When he reached the top, he looked back down at Bora with something like wonder. "I never thought to ignore the marked path," he said. Stories like that started spreading through the battalion. Ganthor discovered that his rock-like body made him nearly immune to energy weapons, so instead of dodging like traditional doctrine required, he just walked through fire and grabbed targets directly. A lizard-like soldier named Resh found that his species' camouflage abilities could fool electronic sensors, something nobody had bothered to test because it was not in the official handbook. Even Errol, the gaseous being, realized he could flow through ventilation systems and appear behind enemies in places no solid creature could reach. Day 1 focused on weapons training, but not in any traditional sense. He brought soldiers to the range and handed them weapons designed for completely different species. A 2-armed human tried using a 4-armed rifle. An 8-foot warrior experimented with a pistol designed for 6-inch creatures. Most of it was ridiculous and impractical, but sometimes it revealed something unexpected. The point is not to find the perfect weapon, Daiwan explained to his confused students. The point is to understand that any object can be a weapon if you use it creatively. In real combat, you won't always have your preferred gear. You'll have whatever you can grab, so learn to improvise. By the end of the 2nd month, the battalion was starting to function as a unit, but not like any military unit the galaxy had seen before. They did not march in formation. They did not follow standard squad structures. Each group developed its own method of communication and cooperation, based on the species involved and their unique abilities. Gia created scenarios where nothing went according to plan. She would give them an objective, then cut their communications, or announce that half their weapons had malfunctioned, or introduce random environmental hazards. Traditional military units fell apart under such conditions, but the battalion started to thrive. They had learned to expect chaos and work through it. One night, the training facility's alarms blared. Automated defenses activated. Lights shut off. Emergency protocols locked all the doors. The soldiers scrambled to respond, thinking it was another one of Gia's surprise drills. It was not. Assassins had infiltrated the facility, their mission to kill Gia and Daiwan before they could complete the training program. There were 6 of them, all Velthari warriors trained in stealth operations. They moved through the darkened corridors with deadly efficiency. But they were not prepared for what they encountered. The battalion had learned to operate without central command. When the communications died, each squad independently moved to defensive positions. Ganthor's team sealed the main corridors, turning themselves into living barricades. Errol flowed through the ventilation system, tracking the assassins by the air displacement they created. Krillax and Bora's mixed squad used the darkness as an advantage, their different vision types covering each other's blind spots. The assassins found themselves trapped in a facility that did not follow any logical defensive pattern. Enemies appeared from unexpected directions. Attacks came from angles that should have been impossible. And worst of all, nobody seemed to be waiting for orders from a commander. Every soldier acted independently, making the entire battalion unpredictable. One assassin tried to retreat through what should have been an unguarded maintenance tunnel. He walked directly into Resh, who had been lying perfectly still against the metal wall, his camouflage making him invisible. The lizard soldier's tail sweep knocked the assassin unconscious before he could raise an alarm. Within 20 minutes, all 6 assassins were captured. Not a single battalion soldier was killed, though several were injured. As the lights came back on, Jia surveyed the scene with a mixture of relief and pride. "Who gave the order to split into defensive formations?" she asked. "Nobody," Krillak said. "We just did what made sense." "Who coordinated the squad movements to trap the assassins?" "We did it ourselves," Bora said. "Each squad just reacted to what they saw. It kind of worked out." Daewon smiled. "This is what we've been teaching you. Combat is not about following a perfect plan. It's about every soldier thinking and adapting in real time." The council sent investigators to review what happened. They examined the facility's security recordings and interviewed the captured assassins. One of the Velthari warriors was particularly angry. "They fight without discipline," he complained. "Without structure. Without honor. They are like a swarm of insects attacking from everywhere and nowhere." "And yet they defeated you," the investigator pointed out. 6 elite warriors could not eliminate 2 humans protected by this untrained rabble. "They should not have been able to coordinate without a command structure," the assassin insisted. "It violates every principle of military science." The investigator filed a report noting that human training methods produced unpredictable and highly effective results. The council was not pleased by this development. They had expected Jia to fail, or at least struggle significantly. Instead, she was turning rejects into something dangerous. In the 4th month, Jia brought in a combat psychologist named Yoon Seo from Earth. Yoon Seo was an expert in psychological warfare, the kind of tactics that disturbed traditional military commanders but won battles. "Your enemies have predictable psychology," Yoon Seo explained to the battalion. "They expect certain behaviors. They prepare for specific tactics. Your job is to violate those expectations so completely that they make mistakes." She smiled. "Fear is a weapon. Confusion is a weapon. Making your enemy question what they know is sometimes more effective than any gun." The battalion learned to use noise as a weapon, silence as a trap, fake retreats to draw enemies into ambushes, and false radio chatter to mislead opponents. They practiced making their movements seem random while actually following a hidden pattern only they understood. They learned that sometimes the best way to fight was to make the enemy too scared or confused to fight back effectively. By the 5th month, something remarkable had happened. The battalion had bonded into a genuine unit despite consisting of a dozen species that had never worked together before. They ate meals together, mixing their different dietary needs at shared tables. They invented games that could be played by beings with different body types. They even developed a kind of hybrid language, taking words from each species and creating something new, and they had become genuinely dangerous. When Jia ran the final training simulation, she threw everything at them. Overwhelming numbers, equipment failures, impossible terrain, and objectives that changed mid-mission. The battalion adapted to all of it. They split and reformed, advanced and retreated, fought and fled as needed, never locked into any single approach. At the end of the simulation, Daewon reviewed the results with Jia in private. "They're ready," he said. "Maybe not perfect, but ready." "They'll have to be," Jia said quietly. "The council just sent new orders. The Skarnathi invasion is ahead of schedule. We deploy to Karis 9 in 3 weeks, not 3 months. 3 weeks? That's not enough time to— It's the time we have, Jia interrupted. So we use it. That's what we've been teaching them, right? Work with what you have, not what you wish you had. She called the battalion together one last time before deployment. They stood in the training hall where they had first met 5 months ago. But they were different now. Confident, unified, dangerous in ways their original military commanders never imagined. "In 3 weeks we go to war," Jia told them. "Real war, not simulations. Some of you will probably die, but you won't die following orders you don't understand. And you won't die because your doctrine failed to adapt to reality. You'll fight as a team of thinking, creative warriors who know how to survive chaos." She looked across their varied faces. "The galaxy is going to learn what happens when you stop fighting by the rules. Let's show them." The planet Karis 9 was supposed to be a paradise world. Lush forests, clean water, and mineral deposits worth fortunes had made it a prize colony. Now it was a battlefield. Smoke rose from burning settlements, and the sounds of weapons fire echoed across valleys that should have been peaceful. The Scarnathi horde had invaded 3 weeks ago. They were a species that lived for conquest. Their entire society built around military expansion. 2,000 warriors had landed on Karis 9, and every traditional defense force sent against them had been destroyed or forced to retreat. The Scarnathi fought with mathematical precision, their tactics calculated by advanced computers that predicted enemy movements with frightening accuracy. The Galactic Command had declared the planet lost. Evacuation ships were loading the last civilians when Jia's battalion arrived. 150 soldiers against 2,000. The odds were insane. Captain Hyunwoo, who had transported them to the planet aboard the Defiant Dawn, pulled Jia aside before she disembarked. "This is a suicide mission," he said bluntly. "The Council is sending you here to die. They never expected you to succeed. They just want to say they gave you a chance." "Probably," Jia agreed. "But we're going anyway." "Why?" "You could run, take your battalion, and disappear into neutral space. Nobody would blame you," Jia smiled. "Because if we run, nothing changes. Humans stay the weak newcomers. The galaxy keeps fighting the same way it always has, and more people die following rules that don't work anymore." She picked up her gear. "Sometimes you have to close the distance and laugh at the odds. That's what makes us human." The battalion landed at a forward base that was barely holding together. A handful of defenders, mostly automated drones, were all that stood between the Scarnathi and the last evacuation point. A human fleet communications officer named Minji was coordinating the retreat from a damaged command bunker. "You're the reinforcements?" Minji asked, looking at the assembled battalion with obvious disappointment. "They sent 150 soldiers? Against the entire horde? We're enough," Day One said calmly. "No, you're not," Minji said. "The Scarnathi have predictive combat computers. They analyze your tactics and counter them before you even commit to an attack. Traditional forces can't compete with that level of calculation." "Good thing we're not a traditional force," Jia said. She pulled up a tactical map of the area. "Where are the Scarnathi concentrated?" "Everywhere," Minji said. "They've split into 5 major groups, each one pushing toward key strategic locations. They'll have the whole planet locked down within 48 hours. Then we have 48 hours to break them," Jia said. She turned to her battalion. "Listen up. We're implementing Protocol Chaos starting now. Every squad operates independently. No central command structure. No communication between squads unless absolutely necessary. Each team picks its own target and engages however it wants. The goal is not to win battles. The goal is to be so unpredictable that their computers can't figure out what we're doing." Ganthor raised a massive stone hand. "But how do we coordinate without communication?" "We don't," Jia said. "That's the point. The Scarnathi predict tactics by analyzing patterns. If we have no pattern, they can't predict anything. Just hit them hard, hit them weird, and keep moving." Back on Earth, Elder Sujin was watching the battle unfold through satellite feeds, providing remote tactical advice when requested. But even she seemed doubtful. "You're describing controlled chaos," her voice came through the communication link. "That only works if your soldiers are smart enough to create useful chaos rather than just random noise." "Then I guess we're about to find out if 5 months of training was enough," Jia said. The battalion split up and vanished into the broken terrain of Karis 9. Each squad chose its own path, its own target, its own method of attack. The Scarnathi combat computers registered multiple small units moving in, apparently random directions, and flagged it as inefficient and non-threatening. That was their first mistake. Krillax and Boraz. Squad found a Scarnathi supply depot. Traditional tactics would involve surveillance, planning, and a coordinated assault. Instead, Bora suggested they just walk in the front door. Krillax thought she was joking until he realized she was serious. They approached the depot openly, as if they belonged there. The Scarnathi guards saw them coming and raised weapons, but hesitated. The computers could not find a scenario in their database where enemies simply walked directly toward a guarded position, without weapons drawn. In the 3 seconds of confusion, Krillax's squad struck. They were inside the perimeter before the guards could process what was happening. The depot was destroyed. Krillax and Bora's team vanished into the forest before reinforcements arrived. Ganthor's squad took a different approach. They found a fortified Skarnathi position built into a canyon wall, protected by overlapping fields of fire. Standard tactics said it was impossible to assault from the front, so you had to find a way around or above. Ganthor ignored all of that and just walked directly at it. Energy weapons hit him, burning his rock-like skin but not stopping him. He reached the fortification wall and simply started pulling it apart with his bare hands, while the Skarnathi focused all their fire on him. The rest of his squad circled around and attacked from the side. The position fell within minutes. Errol's squad used their gaseous team leader to infiltrate a Skarnathi command post. Errol flowed through the ventilation system, appeared inside the sealed room and triggered a chemical reaction that knocked out all the biological operators while leaving the computers running. When the Skarnathi recovered, they found their computers reprogrammed to give false information. Half their forces spent the next 6 hours responding to threats that did not exist. Each squad fought differently. Each victory was accomplished through methods that made no sense to traditional military analysis. And most importantly, there was no pattern for the Skarnathi computers to analyze. Every engagement was unique, unpredictable, and completely illogical from a conventional tactical standpoint. But it was working. Warlord Skarvex, commander of the invasion force, watched his casualty reports with growing frustration. He was a tactical genius, undefeated in 43 campaigns. His combat computers were the most advanced in the galaxy, and yet he could not predict what these bizarre mixed-species units would do next. Analysis, he demanded of his lead tactical officer. "None available, Warlord," the officer replied nervously. "The enemy forces have no command structure we can identify. No communication patterns, no unified strategy. Each unit appears to be operating independently with no coordination." "That's impossible," Skarvex said. "Armies require coordination. Where is their central command?" "We don't know. Either it's too well hidden for us to detect or it doesn't exist." Skarvex stared at the tactical display showing dozens of small contacts moving erratically across the planet. "What kind of military operates without central command?" On the third day of battle, Day 1 led a strike team deep into Skarnathi-controlled territory. Their objective was simple but insane: capture or kill Warlord Skarvex himself. Traditional doctrine said you never target enemy commanders until you had secured tactical superiority. Day 1 did not care about traditional doctrine. His team used misdirection, fake radio chatter, and deliberate false trails to draw Skarnathi forces away from their command center. Then they struck fast, moving through areas that should have been impassable for a military unit. Resh's camouflage hid them from sensors. Ganthor's strength let them bypass obstacles that would stop normal soldiers. And Bora's weird talent for lockpicking opened doors that were supposed to be sealed. They found Skarvex in his command bunker, surrounded by tactical displays and computer terminals. The warlord was not a coward, though. He picked up his weapons and prepared to fight. "You cannot defeat me," Skarvex said. "I have studied war for 70 years. I have never lost a battle." "Then you're about due for a learning experience," Day 1 replied. They fought. Skarvex was skilled, his movements precise and economical, the result of decades of training. But Day 1 had learned to fight on a world where nothing was fair and rules were suggestions at best. He used furniture as weapons, kicked dust into Skarvex's face, and attacked from angles that formal combat training never covered. The duel ended with Day 1's blade at Skarvex's throat. "Order your forces to withdraw," Day 1 said. "I will not surrender to inferior tactics," Skarvex growled. "These aren't inferior tactics," Day 1 said. "They're just tactics you don't understand." Before Skarvex could respond, Gia entered the bunker. She had fought her way through the outer defenses, her squad clearing a path with their usual creative chaos. She looked tired, covered in dust and minor burns, but very much alive. "He's not going to surrender," Gia told Day 1. "Traditional military honor prevents it. He'd rather die than admit defeat." "Then what do we do?" Day 1 asked. Gia walked over to the tactical displays and studied them for a moment. Then she started laughing. Not nervous laughter, but genuine amusement. "Look at this. He has a complete tactical analysis of every battle ever fought in galactic history. Thousands of campaigns, millions of engagements, all analyzed and categorized." She looked at Skarvex. "And you still lost to us. Do you know why?" "Your tactics are chaos," Skarvex said bitterly. Random noise. "No," Gia said. "Our tactics are creative. There's a difference. Chaos is meaningless randomness. Creativity is finding new solutions to old problems. Your computers can predict every traditional tactic because they've all been done before. But we keep inventing new ones right there in the moment, based on what we're seeing and what we can do. She gestured to her mixed species squad. That's what happens when you train soldiers to think for themselves instead of just following doctrine. At that moment, new contacts appeared on the tactical displays. A fleet had just entered orbit around Karis 9. But these were not evacuation ships or reinforcements. They were Velthari warships. Scarvex smiled grimly. The Velthari Empire is my ally. They will reinforce my position and crush your little force. But then something unexpected happened. The Velthari ships began firing on Skarnathi positions. Ground forces deployed, led by a familiar figure. Velrakis, the warrior Gia had embarrassed months ago during the interrupted duel, appeared on the communication channel. This is Velrakis of the Velthari Empire. We are engaging Skarnathi forces in support of the Galactic Defenders. Gia stared at the screen. Why are you helping us? Because you were right, Velrakis said. My people hired the Skarnathi to attack your training battalion. We paid them to invade Karis 9 so you would fail. I discovered this conspiracy and brought evidence to my government. They were dishonored by what our leaders had done, and I was given permission to make amends. He paused. You defeated me with unconventional tactics, then saved me from disgrace by exposing the poison plot. Now I will fight beside you using methods you have taught the galaxy. The battle turned. With Velthari reinforcements and Gia's chaotic tactics combined, the Skarnathi forces began to collapse. Their computers could not handle two wildly different combat philosophies attacking simultaneously. Scarvex watched his invasion crumble on the displays. Finally, he looked at Gia. I do not understand your methods, but I cannot deny your results. That's the closest to a compliment I'm getting, isn't it? Gia said. Yes, Scarvex admitted. Then, surprisingly, he laughed. A short, bitter sound, but genuine. I have been defeated by chaos disguised as creativity. Perhaps I have been fighting the same way for too long. Gia smiled. If it helps, you're not the first person to learn that lesson from humanity. And you probably won't be the last. 6 months after the Battle of Karis 9, the galaxy looked different, not in any physical way, but in how its peoples thought about war, tactics, and military tradition. The victory of Gia's unconventional battalion had sent ripples through every military organization in galactic space. The Galactic Council convened to address the situation. Arbiter Thexelon stood before the assembled representatives, and for the first time in his long existence he seemed uncertain about what to say. The human Gia was given an impossible task, he began. Train rejects using unproven methods, then defeat an enemy that had crushed every traditional force sent against them. We expected her to fail. Many of us hoped she would fail, because her success challenges 50,000 years of military doctrine. He paused. She did not fail. Against all probability and logic, the human methods worked. The council chambers buzzed with conversation. Some species were excited by the possibilities. Others were horrified at the implications. A few refused to accept that chaos could defeat order. Therefore, Thexelon continued, the council recognizes human combat philosophy as a legitimate martial tradition. The charges against Gia are dismissed. Humanity is granted full military status within the galactic community. He looked directly at the human delegation. Furthermore, we request that Earth establish a formal military academy where other species can learn these techniques. Ambassador Tae-hee stood to respond. She had aged visibly over the past months, the stress of political maneuvering and the fear of losing Gia having taken their toll. But now she smiled. On behalf of humanity, we accept. The academy will be built on Earth, and it will welcome students from any species willing to challenge their assumptions about combat. Not everyone was happy with this decision. Several traditional military powers walked out of the council chambers in protest. The Velthari Empire, however, remained. Velrakis himself had become an unexpected advocate for human methods after fighting alongside Gia's battalion. My people spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of honorable combat, Velrakis said when it was his turn to speak. We believed there was one correct way to fight, one path to victory. The humans showed us that rigidity is not strength, it is vulnerability. He gestured with all 4 arms, a sign of deep respect in Velthari culture. We will send our best young warriors to study at the Human Academy. not to abandon our traditions, but to learn when to adapt them. After the council session ended, Jia and Daiwan met with the members of their battalion one final time. The soldiers had become celebrities across the galaxy, each one interviewed and studied by military analysts trying to understand what had happened on Karis 9. But they remained a cohesive unit, bound by shared experience and mutual trust. "So what happens to us now?" Krillax asked. The insectoid warrior had changed significantly since the early days of training. He moved with confidence now, no longer waiting for permission before acting. "That's up to you," Jia said. "The council has offered to make the battalion permanent. You would continue as a special operations unit, deployed to situations where traditional military forces have failed. You would have access to the best equipment, training facilities, and support. But it's volunteer only. Anyone who wants to return to their homeworld or pursue other opportunities can do so with full honors." Bora spoke up immediately. "I'm staying. This is the first time I've felt like I was really good at something. Why would I leave?" One by one, the other soldiers agreed. Out of the 150 original members, 147 chose to remain. The 3 who left did so for personal reasons, family obligations that could not be ignored. But they promised to return if ever needed. The battalion was renamed the Unchained, a title suggested by Ganthor. "We are no longer bound by the old rules," he explained in his slow, rumbling voice. "We fight with freedom." Daiwan was offered a position as senior instructor at the New Earth Military Academy. He accepted, though he negotiated for the right to occasionally rejoin the Unchained if they needed him. "Teaching is important," he said. "But I'm still a soldier." "I can't forget that." Jia faced a more difficult decision. The council offered her a position as military advisor, one of only 12 individuals in the entire galaxy with that rank. She would help coordinate defense strategies across hundreds of worlds, influence how billions of soldiers were trained and deployed. It was an incredible opportunity, but it also meant she would no longer fight in the field. She would become a politician, a position she had spent her entire life avoiding. She met with Captain Hyunwoo aboard the Defiant Dawn, now formally designated as the Unchained's transport and support vessel. They sat in the observation deck, watching Earth rotate slowly below them. Humanity's homeworld looked peaceful from orbit, blue and green and beautiful. "What are you going to do?" Hyunwoo asked. "I don't know," Jia admitted. "Part of me wants to take the council position. I could help shape galactic military policy, prevent the kind of rigid thinking that almost got Daiwan killed in that duel. I could make a real difference at the highest levels." "But," Hyunwoo prompted, "but I'm a soldier, not a diplomat. I belong in the field, with people who need me to teach them how to survive impossible situations." She sighed. "The galaxy has thousands of good politicians. It has very few people who can train soldiers to think creatively under pressure." "So you've already decided," Hyunwoo said with a smile. "You're going to turn down the council position and stay with the Unchained?" "Probably," Jia agreed. "Is that stupid? Turning down that much power and influence?" "Maybe," Hyunwoo said, "but it's very human. We tend to choose what feels right over what looks impressive." He stood and extended his hand. "Whatever you decide, it's been an honor serving with you." Jia made her decision the next day. She politely declined the council position and instead requested permission to continue leading the Unchained. The council was disappointed but not surprised. Thexlon himself commented that it was a very human response to choose adventure over advancement. The Earth Military Academy was built in the mountains of Korea, a location chosen for its historical significance and its challenging terrain. The facility was designed to accommodate 2,000 students at a time, with spaces adapted for dozens of different species and body types. Traditional parade grounds were replaced with obstacle courses where no 2 runs were ever the same. Classrooms featured simulation equipment that deliberately malfunctioned at random times. Even the dining halls were mixed, forcing students from different species to interact and learn from each other. Daiwan oversaw the first class of recruits. They came from 30 different worlds, ranging from young warriors eager to prove themselves to veteran soldiers who wanted to understand why their traditional training had failed them. The Academy's motto, suggested by Jia, was simple: think, adapt, survive. The first lesson Daiwan taught was not about weapons or tactics. It was about questioning assumptions. You have been trained to believe there is a right way to do things, He told his students on their first day. Proper stances. Approved tactics. Official doctrine. All of that has value, but it also limits you. This academy will teach you to recognize when the rules help you and when they trap you. You will learn to think for yourselves, to create solutions on the fly, to trust your instincts even when they contradict your training. A student from a highly disciplined military culture raised his hand. But without rules, how do we maintain order? How do we prevent chaos? We don't, Day One said simply. We learn to use chaos as a weapon. That's the human way. The academy quickly gained a reputation as the most challenging military training facility in the galaxy. Students were pushed physically, mentally, and philosophically. Many failed and returned home. But those who graduated became some of the most sought-after soldiers in galactic space. Every major military organization wanted officers trained in human methods. The Velthari Empire underwent its own transformation. Velrakis, now a respected general, began reforming their rigid military structure. Traditional honor duels were modified to allow for more creative combat. Training programs incorporated improvisation exercises, and most significantly, they started recruiting soldiers from other species, something previously forbidden by Velthari tradition. When asked why he was making such radical changes, Velrakis gave a simple answer. Gia taught me that honor without flexibility is just another word for stubbornness. True strength comes from knowing when to adapt. The Skarnathi Horde was another unexpected outcome of the Karis 9 battle. Warlord Skarvex, after his defeat, spent months studying human military history. He became fascinated by Earth's tendency to turn enemies into allies, a concept foreign to his conquest-focused culture. Eventually, he approached the council with an unusual proposal. The Skarnathi wanted to join the galactic community, but not as conquerors. As partners. It was a controversial suggestion, given the Skarnathi's history of violence. But Gia supported it. They learned from defeat, she argued. That takes more courage than winning. Give them a chance, the council agreed with conditions. The Skarnathi would send officers to the Earth Academy. They would participate in joint military exercises with former enemies. And they would contribute their tactical computers to a shared defense network, helping all species benefit from their analytical capabilities while learning to value the unpredictable human element. Years passed. The Unchained completed dozens of missions, each one different from the last. They rescued hostages from situations where traditional strike teams had failed. They defended colonies against raiders using tactics the attackers had never encountered. They even negotiated peace treaties, because sometimes the best way to end a conflict was to make both sides realize their traditional approaches were not working. Bora was promoted to lieutenant and eventually captain. She became known for her ability to understand and communicate with dozens of different species, bridging gaps that had existed for centuries. She also took on a teaching role, training new recruits in the art of creative problem-solving under pressure. Krillax became the Unchained's tactical coordinator, though his approach to tactics involved mostly making educated guesses and adjusting on the fly. Humans taught me that perfect plans are useless, he would say. Good enough plans that adapt are better. Ganthor discovered a talent for engineering, using his strength and patience to solve mechanical problems in ways no other species could manage. He developed a new type of portable fortification that could be deployed in minutes rather than hours, revolutionizing defensive combat across the galaxy. The phrase "close the distance and laugh" entered common usage across galactic space. It became shorthand for challenging assumptions, breaking rigid thinking and finding creative solutions to seemingly impossible problems. Young soldiers used it as a motto. Political reformers adopted it as a rallying cry. Even civilian businesses started using it to encourage innovative thinking. Gia continued to lead the Unchained, but she also took on a mentorship role for the Academy. Several times a year, she would return to Earth and speak to the students, sharing stories from the field and answering their questions. She never sugar-coated the reality of combat. She told them about the friends she had lost, the missions that had failed, the times when creativity was not enough and people died anyway. But she also told them about the victories, the impossible situations overcome through quick thinking and teamwork. She told them about former enemies who became trusted friends. She told them about the galaxy slowly, gradually learning that there were better ways to resolve conflicts than the rigid traditions of the past. One day, a young human student asked her a question that made her pause. "Do you regret breaking the rules at that first duel?" You could have just let it happen. Maybe day one would have lost, but you would not have spent 6 months fearing execution. You would not have had to prove yourself in an impossible battle. Was it worth it? Gia thought for a long moment. Yes, she said finally, because that one decision changed everything. It showed the galaxy that humans do not accept the rules just because they're ancient. We question them, we challenge them, and when necessary, we break them. That's not disrespect. It's how progress happens. But you could have died, the student pressed. Yes, Gia agreed. But I did not. And because I survived, hundreds of thousands of soldiers are being trained in better methods. Billions of people live under more flexible, adaptive defense systems. And the galaxy is a little less rigid, a little more willing to try new approaches. She smiled. So yes, it was worth it. Every risk, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt. Because when you close the distance and laugh at the impossible, sometimes the impossible blinks first. On a quiet morning 10 years after the interrupted duel, Gia stood on a hill overlooking the Earth Military Academy. Thousands of students from hundreds of worlds trained below, their different body types and abilities creating a chaotic but purposeful scene. She could see Day One in the distance, demonstrating some technique to a group of attentive learners. The Unchained ship was docked at the orbital platform above, ready for their next mission. Ambassador Tae-hee joined her on the hill. The diplomat was older now, her hair fully gray, but she moved with the same sharp intelligence that had helped navigate humanity through its first difficult years in galactic space. The council is meeting next month, Tae-hee said. They want to discuss expanding the academy system. Several species are requesting permission to build their own facilities based on our model. That's good, Gia said. The more people who learn to think flexibly, the safer the galaxy becomes. They also want to give you a formal title, Tae-hee continued. Something like Grand Marshal or Supreme Military Advisor. Very prestigious. Very powerful, Gia laughed. Let me guess. I would have to attend meetings, write reports, and spend most of my time in council chambers arguing about budgets and protocols? Probably, Tae-hee admitted. Then no thank you, Gia said. I have a battalion to lead and soldiers to train. Let someone else collect fancy titles. Tae-hee smiled. I thought you would say that. She was quiet for a moment, watching the training exercises below. You know, when you first interrupted that duel, I thought you had destroyed everything I had been working toward. Humanity's diplomatic position, our chance at acceptance, all of it seemed to collapse in one moment of impulse. It was not impulse, Gia said. It was a choice. I saw someone about to die for no good reason, and I chose to act. I know that now, Tae-hee said, and I understand why you did it. But at the time I was terrified. Then I watched you turn that impossible situation into something miraculous. You took the galaxy's rejects and made them into heroes. You defeated an unbeatable enemy using methods nobody believed would work. And you did all of it while laughing at people who said it was impossible. She put a hand on Gia's shoulder. You taught the galaxy something important. You taught us that the future belongs to those brave enough to question the past. Below them, a mixed species squad successfully completed an obstacle course that had been specifically designed to be impossible using traditional tactics. They celebrated together, their different victory gestures and sounds blending into something new and uniquely theirs. Gia watched them and smiled. The galaxy is changing, she said. Slowly, but it's changing. Maybe in another 100 years all of this will seem obvious. Maybe future generations will not understand why it was ever controversial to train soldiers to think for themselves. Maybe, Tae-hee agreed. But right now, in this moment, you are the person who made it possible. The human who closed the distance and laughed at 10,000 years of tradition. That legacy will last long after we are both gone. Gia considered this, then shrugged. I just did what needed to be done. Any other human would have made the same choice. Perhaps, Tae-hee said. But you were the one who did it. That makes all the difference. As the sun set over the academy, casting long shadows across the training grounds, Gia thought about the journey that had brought her here, the interrupted duel, the impossible mission, the battle that should have been a defeat, all of it connected by a simple principle. When faced with rigid rules that led to unnecessary death, sometimes the most honorable thing you could do was break them. The galaxy had learned that lesson. It was still learning, and Gia would continue teaching it, one creative solution and impossible victory at a time, because that was the human way. Close the distance. Laugh at the odds, and show everyone watching that there was always another option if you were brave enough to imagine it.